the fancy name is, can we naturalize ethics? That's,
Right.
that's the guy. That's the idea, right?
Right.
Can we have an all-natural morality? In fact, that's the name of this chapter.
That's right. Yeah, we're trying to do what Hume did and try and find a scientific explanation for how we can measure goodness or badness or some approximation to those concepts.
So he says here, and the subtitle of the chapter is The Well-Being Theory of Morality. And he says he wants to do two things in this chapter. First, that he will present this naturalistic version of morality, and then by focusing on Sam Harris's view. And then second, he says that he will consider some problems with Harris's account. So that's what he's trying to accomplish in this particular chapter. All right, so let's jump in here and see how he does here. So consider, he says, that there's an objective fact about whether a human being is suffering, right? We can know one way or another, right? And he says, suppose the pain in your lower back, let's say. Suppose that a few days later the pain is gone. He says, all things considered, you'll be better off than you were. The pain is now gone, so you're no longer suffering. And so he says this, in fact, your well-being seems traceable to facts about your physiology, to your physical facts. And these physical facts trace facts about your brain states, for example, and they are objective.
Right.
So we have objective brain states he's suggesting that are, purportedly may be able to be measured or viewed or whatever,
Right.
And so that's the first step toward getting to these types of naturalistic values that Harris got. He says, if, as Harris explains, human well-being depends entirely on events in the world and states of the human brain, then well-being is something that science can speak directly to.
Right. Yeah, we can put on the little brain monitors and measure, okay, this is what is flaring up in your pain center, or here's the physiological symptoms of stress being caused, and so we measure, how a lie detector works, and we can make determinations based on whether or not you're feeling good. The well-being is what it's going to come back to.
And so well-being, then, if indeed a particular action produces well-being, it is morally right. If it doesn't, it's morally wrong. Right? Well-being, right, and that can be measured with regard to brain states. He says he calls this Harris's Humean project, right? Because Hume was the one that, posed trying to get morality from a natural source, right, from the natural world. And so he calls this Humean project. And he says, now, so here's the question. What reason does Harris offer for making ethics a matter of well-being? Why is it that ethics is a matter of well-being? Well, the bottom line is that good and evil need only consist in this, and it makes no sense whatsoever to claim that an action that harms everyone affected, even its perpetrator, might still be good.
Right.
The main criteria, therefore, is that misery and well-being not be completely random, right? So we only need to admit that experiences of conscious creatures are lawfully dependent on states of the universe. And so once we have that, Harris then defines good as anything that supports well-being, and bad as that which causes harm. So if it supports well-being, it's good.
Right.
And if it doesn't support well-being, that's bad. Right?
Right. If it hurts you, if it harms you, if it makes
Causes
people feel bad,
unnecessary suffering, right? That harms the well-being, that's bad. All right. And again, these are brain states. They can be measured scientifically, that sort of thing. Right. So he says a rational approach to this ethics becomes possible once we realize that questions of right and wrong are really questions about the happiness and suffering of sentient creatures. That's really what it boils down to, right? Well-being has to do with happiness and suffering, right? So he saes, in one sense, Harris's view isn't at all new. It's a version of utilitarianism.
Right. So kind of what's right is based on this idea of, well, it works.
So it's a consequentialist theory, And if, usually it's talked about the greatest good for the greatest number kind of thing, right? And so if the consequences result in the greatest good for the greatest number, then that's the right action. That's the morally right action to do.
The trolley problem is in there. Killing the baby to save all humanity. That's in there. All those little fun thought experiments. Pretty much Machiavelli would appreciate this type of thought experiment.
Yeah. So that's a consequentialist ethics. The consequences are what we're looking at, and in this case, we call these hedonistic consequences. Hedon is good feelings and that sort of thing. And so he says Mills, both John Stuart Mills and Harris accounts are also called hedonistic theories because they identify goodness with pleasure or happiness. So that's the idea of hedon, pleasure or happiness. Although the pleasure need not be simply physical, right? It can include higher pleasures like friendship and love and that sort of thing. So the idea here is if it brings out pleasure or happiness, even these higher level pleasures, then that is the morally good thing, the morally right thing.
And we do see parts of society rotating around this idea, this ends justify the means. Well, you have Donnie Brasco. He's an undercover FBI agent. He goes in, he does all these bad things. At what point in time do we pull him out? Because then he's lost. Well, although he's, been an extortionist, a drug dealer, a pimp, a runner for the mob. He's pretty much on par with allowing for police officers to get shot and killed, and political rivals and different people getting assassinated. So as long as in the end the organization's taken down, then the ends justify the means. That's
right. You can do, because the consequences is what counts, right? In this case, it's good consequences. It's consequences that bring happiness as opposed to unnecessary suffering. Yeah. And, of course, he says that he mentions here Senator Armstrong argues for a similar view. Armstrong calls his view harm-based morality, right? According to this view, what really makes certain acts immoral is that such acts cause harm to other people for no good reason, right? So the benefit of these views, according to Senator Armstrong, is that it's completely secular. So he can get around God with this. It's just a matter of, does it harm? There's no reason to doubt that death, pain, and disability are bad. There's no doubt. This is no doubt true, but it's enough to account for morality. So there you go. His is similar to Harris's. His is based, he calls it a harm-based morality.
Right. Well, and, we do have to take time to establish the fact that at least Harris is dealing with an attempt to explain what we talked about in, I believe, the last chapter, the chapter before, of this kind of innate sense, this drives people to argue viciously or with intense emotion. And so Harris is attempting to find a root cause in that other than just personal preference, or at least what he claims is, puts a stage in there between personal preference, kind of this subjective, whatever is good for me is good for you, postmodernist type thinking.
Relativism.
And he's trying to ground it in a Western idea.
Right.